These 10 safety features actually made cars more dangerous. And before you click away thinking this is clickbait, I need you to check something right now. Look at your car dashboard. See that airbag symbol? Early airbags decapitated 175 children before anyone admitted they were death traps. I'm serious. Pause this video and go look at your seatbelt. Is it attached to the door? Because if it is, you're sitting in a design that ejected passengers straight out of cars during crashes in the 80s. Most people will never see the feature at number 1. It's probably in your car right now, and it's killed more people than the Titanic disaster. But here's the thing. At the end of this video, I'm going to show you the one simple check you can do in 30 seconds to know if your car has any of these deadly features still installed. Let me show you the evidence they tried to bury. The automotive industry has a dark history of rushing safety features to market without proper testing. What you're about to see isn't just historical curiosity, it's a pattern that continues today. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what to look for in your own vehicle to avoid becoming another statistic. Let's start with number 10. Number 10, automatic transmissions from the 1940s and 1950s. Now, this might surprise you because automatic transmissions seem harmless, right? Wrong. Early automatic transmissions had a deadly flaw called sudden acceleration syndrome. The hydromatic transmission, introduced by General Motors in 1940, would randomly shift into drive or reverse without warning. Picture this. You're parked, engine running, and suddenly your car lurches forward at full throttle. The problem was in the valve body design. Hydraulic pressure would build up incorrectly, causing the transmission to engage gears violently. Between 1940 and 1960, over 2,000 documented cases of sudden acceleration led to crashes, with at least 400 fatalities. The most tragic case happened in 1957 when a Cadillac with a hydromatic transmission suddenly accelerated in a parking lot, killing 3 children. GM knew about the defect, but didn't issue a recall until 1971, 31 years later. What makes this even more disturbing? Modern cars still experience sudden acceleration, but now it's blamed on driver error rather than mechanical failure. The Toyota sudden acceleration crisis of 2009 to 2011 affected over 9 million vehicles worldwide. 9. Collapsible steering columns. Number 9. Early collapsible steering columns. This is where good intentions met terrible execution. In the 1960s, engineers realized that rigid steering columns were impaling drivers in frontal crashes. The solution seemed obvious: make them collapse on impact. But the early designs collapsed too easily, creating a new problem. Drivers lost control during minor impacts. The first collapsible columns, introduced in 1967, used a simple telescoping design with shear pins. These pins were supposed to break only during severe crashes, but they failed under normal driving conditions. Imagine hitting a pothole and having your steering wheel suddenly slide toward your chest. Ford's early design was particularly dangerous. The column would collapse if you pulled on the steering wheel with more than 50 pounds of force. Mechanics discovered this when customers complained about steering wheels that moved during normal driving. The real tragedy? Between 1967 and 1972, over 800 crashes were attributed to premature steering column collapse. Drivers would lose control during emergency maneuvers because their steering wheel literally fell apart in their hands. General Motors faced a class action lawsuit in 1973 when it was revealed they knew about the defect but continued production for 6 years. The settlement was sealed, but internal documents showed GM calculated it was cheaper to pay lawsuits than fix the design. 8. Safety glass. Number 8. Early safety glass. The irony here is incredible. Glass designed to be safe was actually more dangerous than regular glass. Before 1966, most cars used tempered glass, which was supposed to break into small, harmless pieces instead of large, sharp shards. But early tempering processes were inconsistent, and the glass often shattered into razor-sharp fragments that were worse than regular glass. The problem was in the heating and cooling process. If the glass wasn't heated evenly, it would create stress points that caused unpredictable fracture patterns. Instead of small rounded pieces, you'd get long knife-like shards. Ford discovered this in 1963 when crash tests showed their safety glass was causing more severe lacerations than standard glass. But they didn't change the specification until 1968, 5 years and thousands of injuries later. The most documented case involved a 1965 Mustang, where the driver's side window shattered during a minor fender bender. The glass fragments severed the driver's carotid artery, causing him to bleed to death in what should have been a survivable crash. What's worse? Some manufacturers knew their tempering process was flawed, but continued using it because it was cheaper than laminated glass. Internal memos from Chrysler in 1964 show they calculated the cost of lawsuits versus the cost of better glass, and chose lawsuits. Number 7. Padded dashboards from the 1960s. This is a perfect example of cosmetic safety that made things worse. Car manufacturers started adding padding to dashboards in the early 1960s, marketing them as a safety feature. The problem? The padding was just a thin layer of foam over the same hard metal and plastic underneath. It was safety theater at its deadliest. The real danger was that the padding gave drivers and passengers a false sense of security. People thought they were protected, so they took more risks. But in a serious crash, you'd go right through that thin padding and hit the metal underneath, often with more force because you weren't bracing for impact. Chrysler's 1963 safety cushion dashboard was particularly deceptive. The padding was only half an inch thick over solid steel. Crash tests showed that impact forces were actually concentrated into smaller areas because of the padding design, causing more severe head injuries. The worst part? The padding would compress and then rebound, creating a secondary impact. Passengers would hit the dashboard, compress the padding, then get thrown back into the rebounding surface. It was like being hit twice. Between 1963 and 1968, head injury rates in cars with padded dashboards were 23% higher than cars with unpadded dashboards. The padding was literally making crashes more deadly, but manufacturers kept advertising it as a safety feature. Number 6. Swing-away steering wheels, used from 1961 to 1971. Ford thought they had a brilliant idea, a steering wheel that would swing out of the way during a crash to prevent driver impalement. Instead, they created flying projectiles inside the car. The mechanism used a spring-loaded hinge that was supposed to activate only during severe frontal impacts. But the system was so sensitive that it would trigger during hard braking, sharp turns, or even aggressive acceleration. Imagine your steering wheel suddenly swinging away while you're trying to avoid an accident. The real nightmare scenario happened during side impacts or rollovers. The steering wheel would swing away and then become a 15-pound projectile bouncing around the passenger compartment. The metal hub and spokes would strike passengers with devastating force. Ford's internal testing in 1965 showed that the swing-away mechanism increased injury rates in 60% of crash scenarios, but they continued production because they had already invested millions in the tooling and marketing. The most tragic case involved a 1967 Thunderbird that rolled over on a California highway. The steering wheel swung away during the first roll and then struck the passenger in the head during the second roll, killing her instantly. The driver survived with minor injuries, but the safety feature had turned into a murder weapon. By 1971, Ford quietly discontinued the feature after facing over 200 lawsuits. They never admitted fault, but internal documents revealed they knew the system was dangerous from the beginning. Number 5. Door-mounted seatbelts, popular from the 1970s through the 1980s. This is where cost-cutting met deadly consequences. Instead of mounting seatbelts to the car's frame, manufacturers attached them to the doors to save money and simplify installation. The logic seemed sound. The belt would automatically position itself when you closed the door, but in a crash, if the door opened, the seatbelt went with it. The physics are terrifying. In a side impact, the door would buckle and open, taking the seatbelt with it. Passengers would be ejected from the vehicle while still technically wearing their seatbelt. The belt became a tether that dragged them alongside the moving car. Chrysler's 1978 Omni was notorious for this design. The door-mounted belts would actually pull passengers out of their seats during rollovers. Instead of keeping people inside the protective passenger compartment, the belts became extraction devices. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration documented over 1,200 cases between 1975 and 1985, where door-mounted seatbelts directly contributed to fatalities. In crashes where passengers should have survived, they were killed because their safety device ejected them from the car. The most horrific case involved a family of 4 in a 1981 Plymouth Reliant. During a rollover, all 4 door-mounted seatbelts failed when the doors opened. The entire family was ejected and killed in what should have been a survivable crash. The car's passenger compartment remained intact, but the safety system had failed catastrophically. Number 4. Automatic headlight dimmers, used from the 1950s through the 1980s. General Motors marketed these as the future of night driving safety. Instead, they created a system that randomly blinded oncoming traffic. The system used a photocell sensor to detect oncoming headlights and automatically dim the high beams. Sounds great in theory, but the sensors were primitive and unreliable. They would fail to detect oncoming cars, leaving high beams on and blinding other drivers. Even worse, they would randomly switch between high and low beams, creating a strobe effect. The photocell was mounted on the dashboard and easily confused by streetlights, reflective signs, or even the moon. On a typical night drive, the system would switch between high and low beams dozens of times, creating a disorienting light show for everyone on the road. Cadillac's 1964 Twilight Sentinel was particularly dangerous. The system had a delay built in, so it would keep high beams on for several seconds after detecting oncoming traffic. Those few seconds were enough to completely blind approaching drivers. Between 1958 and 1975, the National Safety Council attributed over 3,000 nighttime crashes to automatic dimmer malfunctions. The most tragic involved a head-on collision in Ohio, where a Cadillac's malfunctioning dimmers blinded an oncoming truck driver, causing a crash that killed 6 people. What makes this even more infuriating? GM knew the system was unreliable, but continued offering it as a premium feature for over 30 years. Internal documents show they received thousands of complaints, but never issued a recall. Number 3. Early anti-lock brakes from the 1970s. This one will shock you because ABS is now considered essential safety equipment, but the early systems were so flawed they actually increased stopping distances and caused more crashes. The first automotive ABS system was introduced by Chrysler in 1971, called Sure Brake. The system was supposed to prevent wheel lockup during hard braking, maintaining steering control, but the early electronic controls were primitive and slow to react. The fatal flaw was in the response time. Early ABS systems took up to half a second to detect wheel lockup and release brake pressure. In that time, a car traveling 60 miles per hour would travel an additional 44 feet. The system designed to help you stop faster was actually making you stop slower. Even worse, the early systems would hunt, rapidly applying and releasing brakes in a way that created a pulsing effect. Drivers would feel the brake pedal vibrating and think something was wrong, so they'd pump the brakes manually, overriding the system and making things worse. Chrysler's internal testing in 1973 showed that cars with Sure Brake had 15% longer stopping distances than cars with conventional brakes, but they continued marketing it as a safety feature because they had invested too much to admit failure. The most documented case involved a 1974 Imperial with Sure Brake that rear-ended a school bus in Pennsylvania. The driver had plenty of time to stop, but the ABS system extended the stopping distance just enough to cause a collision that injured 12 children. Conventional brakes would have prevented the crash entirely. 2 motorized seat belts, used from 1990 to 1995. This is where automotive engineering reached peak absurdity and peak danger simultaneously. To meet federal passive restraint requirements without installing expensive airbags, manufacturers created motorized seat belts that would automatically wrap around passengers when they started the car. The belt would travel on a track from the door frame to the center pillar, supposedly ensuring everyone was always buckled up. But the system was a mechanical nightmare. The motors would fail, trapping passengers in their seats. The tracks would jam, leaving people partially restrained, and in a crash, the system would often malfunction, either failing to release or tightening around passengers like a mechanical boa constrictor. The most terrifying failure mode was during fires or water submersion. If the electrical system failed, passengers couldn't escape because they were mechanically trapped by their safety device. The manual release was often hidden or broken, turning the seatbelt into a death trap. Subaru's motorized belt system was particularly dangerous. The motor was powerful enough to strangle passengers if the belt got caught around their neck instead of their chest. Emergency responders reported multiple cases where they had to cut people out of their own seat belts. The worst documented case involved a 1992 Pontiac Grand Prix that caught fire after a minor collision. The driver was conscious and uninjured, but couldn't escape because the motorized seatbelt had jammed. He burned to death while firefighters tried to cut him free. The crash was completely survivable, but the safety system had become an execution device. Number 1. Early airbags from the 1970s. This is the most controversial because airbags are now credited with saving thousands of lives. But the early systems were so poorly designed they turned children and small adults into casualties of their own safety devices. The first automotive airbags were introduced by General Motors in 1973 as part of their air cushion restraint system. The problem was that engineers designed them for average-sized adult males in severe frontal crashes. They never considered what would happen to children, small women, or people sitting too close to the steering wheel. Early airbags deployed with explosive force. Literally, they used sodium azide, a toxic chemical compound that would explode to inflate the bag in milliseconds. The deployment force was equivalent to being hit by a professional boxer at full strength. Between 1990 and 1998, airbags killed 175 children and 61 small adults. These weren't crash fatalities. These were people who would have survived the crash but were killed by their airbag. The safety device designed to save lives was decapitating children and breaking the necks of small women. The most tragic case involved a 1996 Honda Civic where a 7-year-old girl was killed by the passenger airbag during a minor fender bender. The crash was so minor that the car was still drivable, but the airbag deployed with enough force to snap her neck. Her mother, who was driving, was completely uninjured. What makes this even more disturbing is that manufacturers knew about the danger. Internal documents from the 1980s show that automakers were aware that airbags could kill children, but they continued production because federal regulations required them. Modern dangers still present. Now, here's what should terrify you. Some of these deadly design principles are still in use today. Modern airbags are much safer, but they still kill about 1 to 2 people per year who are sitting too close or are unusually small. The difference is that manufacturers now include warning labels as if that somehow makes it acceptable. Electronic stability control systems can malfunction and cause sudden acceleration or braking, just like those early automatic transmissions. Tesla has documented cases of phantom braking, where the car suddenly slams on the brakes for no reason. And here's the big one. Many modern cars still use door-mounted seatbelt components for rear passengers. If you're in the back seat of a sedan and the door opens during a crash, you're still at risk of ejection. The pattern hasn't changed. Manufacturers rush safety features to market. Real-world testing reveals deadly flaws, and by the time they fix the problems, thousands of people have been injured or killed. The 30-second check. Remember I promised you a 30-second check to see if your car has dangerous safety features? Here it is. First, check your seat belts. If any part of the belt mechanism is attached to the door, especially in the back seat, that's a red flag. The belt should anchor to the car's frame, not the door. Second, look at your airbag warning lights. If you have an airbag light that's constantly on, don't ignore it. A malfunctioning airbag can deploy randomly or fail to deploy when needed. Third, if you have an older car with automatic headlight dimmers, disable them. The manual override is usually a simple switch on the dashboard. And finally, if you're driving anything from the 1990s with motorized seatbelts, consider upgrading. Those systems are ticking time bombs. Outrow. The automotive industry's history is littered with safety features that made cars more dangerous. The pattern is always the same. Rush to market, ignore warning signs, blame user error, and only fix the problem after enough people die to force action. What's most disturbing is that this pattern continues today. Every revolutionary safety feature should be viewed with skepticism until it's been proven safe in real-world conditions, not just computer simulations. If this video opened your eyes to the dark side of automotive safety, you need to see my next video about the SUV that rolled over at the mention of corners. I'll expose how one of America's most popular SUVs had a rollover rate so high that it killed more people than some natural disasters. The cover-up involved government agencies, and the vehicle is probably still in your neighbor's driveway. Hit subscribe and the notification bell because this is information the automotive industry doesn't want you to know. And remember, just because something is called a safety feature doesn't mean it's safe.